Hello folks, Salesforce Summer 24 release is here and we have many exciting new features coming to Salesforce Flows. Now, let's dive right in and let me show you how these things work. And please let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. Now, let me just go through them one by one and I'm going to show you what's coming. I'm in my preview org now, so this one has the latest Summer 24 release already. Now, before we even go into setup, I want to show you something. Here, now in my Lightning applications, I have something called automation. This is brand new. Salesforce is taking flow out of setup. Now, the users who don't have access to setup can also see flows here. They can list flows, see which one is activated, which one is in draft status, and they can also review them in a list view that's searchable. And Salesforce added also a couple of fields that we can use to organize our work. Like, for example, there's a field called category and subcategory. Now, interestingly enough, these fields are not visible in setup yet. And this is a new experience that they are creating, that they'll be working on, I'm sure, for the next few releases. Now, if we go to one of the flows that we have here, we can see there are several fields that we can review on this page. And we can open the flow, open the latest version, and then there is a concept of an owner now, too, which we didn't have in setup. I think what Salesforce wants to do with this is they want to allow people to work on flows even if they don't have setup access. And I think they want to allow people to develop, to build flows, and kind of submit them for testing to be deployed later. So all that functionality will be coming later. And they want to also provide us with a home view that brings the recently modified flows together with error flows. And they want to also link this up to the community resources and training resources. So this is an exciting development that we can play with the new release. Now, to get access to this though, you got to go to your setup, and under process automation settings, we're going to find the last checkbox over here that says allow users who have the necessary permissions to search for, filter, sort, and manage flows using the automation Lightning app. So if you enable this and save it, that automation Lightning app becomes available in your org. Also, another observation, that automation Lightning app is meant to list all the flows in your org, but it only sees the flows that you modify after you start the automation Lightning app. So initially, you don't really see anything on that app, but once you start working on your flows, you modify some of your flows, you add new flows, those become visible in that Lightning automation app. Let's move on. What else do we have here? I'm going to go to my flow setup experience. And here is the announcement related to the new automation Lightning app. We have reviewed that already. And I'm going to click on new flow. So this is the new flow experience. And it gives us here two choices. One is start the flow from scratch. The other one is use a template. If you remember, previously we had just one single window, like a modal in the middle of the screen that had two tabs. And the second tab was templates plus all or something like that. So it gave a more detailed view than what we saw initially on the first screen. Now with this release, we also get the functionality to have Einstein build flows for us based on prompts. That's only available to a subset of licenses. So that's why we don't see that button here, but that button is visible also right here if you have the license that Einstein for Flow is available for. Normally, what you would do is you would start from scratch. So I'm going to do that. Click Next. And when I click Next, I'm going to see a similar view to what we had before. But now I can actually scroll down to see all the other choices. Now, all the flow types are going to be visible here down below, right? So let's start a record triggered flow. Now, a couple of changes that we have found out is related to the email action, for example. Now let's add the email action. One change that came with this release is that the elements are auto-labeled and the API name is also auto-generated. Previously, for the API name to auto-generate, you kind of had to tab through these fields or kind of click and the API name would auto-generate. So you had an opportunity to rename this here before the API name generated. Now that unfortunately has been taken away from us. At this point, I'm not exactly sure whether this is a bug or a feature. People are sharing different takes on this one on social media channels. We are going to find out. But for the advanced flow builder, this is not really a welcome change because we want to customize the label of this element. And we want to make sure that the API name auto-generates based on what we use in the label. And to get that to work, now I have to click back and forth, and I lose precious time. Now here, one addition you are going to see related to the email action, threading token was added here. Threading token to body, threading token to subject. And if you use these, you are going to get the functionality to associate the responses to your emails to the original email. Now you can thread the emails in your org. That's how much I know about it so far. It requires further research and inspection. Another change is related to the action element here. The action element gets a new view. We used to have a modal in the middle of our screen. Now we get a side panel again with action as well. And you see the selection is kind of divided into folders, and you see these icons right next to them, like more visual representation, right? And then we can sort it by category, we can sort it by type. One new action that we have in this release is to be able to lock a record. We could actually trigger approval process from Flow, but we couldn't really decide to lock or unlock a record from Flow. Now that functionality is available inside the Flow Builder. Moving along, let's inspect the create element. Let's say I want to create a contact after I trigger on the opportunity. You can see how cumbersome it is to change these names here. The representation here changed on the UI. I can decide to create this from a record variable or manually. That's now a pull down. I'm going to choose manually here. And I'm going to say I'm going to create a contact record. And when I do that, I'm immediately presented with this information. It says the master record type for this object has 6 required fields. Previously, the Flow site didn't really know how many required fields there were on the object record, right? So now this is useful information. And as you can see, all these fields are pre-filled for me so that I can fill in the values for those. and make sure that I don't really experience any problems when I'm creating the records, because if I forget to set required field, I could experience problems. But that's not necessarily always true, right? So there could be situations, like I think this is checking the master record type, and there could be situations that some of these values are automatically being defaulted to certain values, and they are not really truly required. So I know, for example, these are actually not required. I'm going to delete these. What's truly only required on the contact is actually the last name field. So I'm going to fill in my last name here. Let me add my first name. And let's add a phone number. And that will be 555-555-5555. All right. So here is the new bit that was just recently added. Now I can check for matching records before I create a potential duplicate here. If I enable this bit, I get another section, and this section is going to allow me to kind of do an associated get. So I'm going to SQL my database to see whether there are any matches. And I can decide what a match is. I'm going to say if the last name equals Utkan, and for example, if the first name equals Andy. By the way, this is not really associated with your matching or duplicate rules in your org. This is completely separate. So if you find a match here, you can decide what to do then with your create element. How are you going to execute it? You can say, if you find a single match, update the matching record rather than creating a record, or you can skip the matching record, right? Or if multiple matching records exist, then update the most recently modified matching record or skip all matching records. So that's totally up to you. Let's go ahead and get all tasks associated with this opportunity. Get records, get tasks, and get all the tasks that have in the what ID $record ID, opportunity ID. And I want all the records. So let's add a decision here, throw a decision in here, and to check whether we got any task records. This is a very popular use case. You want to check whether your get produced a null or did it produce any records. Now, when you add a decision, you are going to see the whole labeling and API name issue just became even bigger, because now your decision is auto-named. Your first outcome is also auto-named, right? I would have to click in and out and rename everything. Now, I know null works here. And here you are going to see there's a new interface, by the way, for your resource picker. It includes icons, and it's more colorful and visual. And it's organized into sections like this. So what I want to check is whether the get task step produced any results. So I'm going to click on tasks from get tasks. Now we used to check is null here, and that worked. But when we used, for example, the collection filter, what ended up happening is sometimes we didn't get any results. And although we didn't get any results, the is null check didn't really work. So it didn't really return any meaningful results. What we would have to do is we would assign the number of elements in an assignment step to a number variable, and we would check that number variable to see whether it had 1 or 0 number, for example. We now have a brand new operator that we can use, and that is going to produce meaningful results also when we use a collection filter. So I think we are going to change our habit here. Instead of using is null against a collection, we're going to use is empty. Check against true or not, right? So that is a brand new operator that we are going to use to check whether a collection is empty or not. All right, moving along to screen flows, I'm going to add a screen here and throw an address component on the screen, right? So let's name this one address. Label is address, API name is address. Now we see there are new parameters here, new fields. Show Google Maps search field. Let's set this to true. And name that Google Maps. So now we have actually an address field right here that allows me to search against the Google Maps database. In debug it, I'm going to see this field here that allows me to enter address information. And as soon as I enter 355, it actually gives me suggestions from Google, right? You know, I can use 355 Monument Road, Jacksonville, Florida. And if I choose that, all the rest of the fields are going to be filled in for me, which is awesome. So another functionality that we can look at here is on our screen element, some of the fields here got disabled in read-only parameters. Let's see if we have it for text. Text was one of the early components that we classically used for most of the stuff if we couldn't find any other suitable components to use. And it didn't really have a read-only or disable setting. Now we get a read-only or disable setting. And the difference here is one of them, this allows the user to make any changes on the field. The other one, this allows the change and also prevents the user from copying the value. So that's a welcome change that's been added to many components now in screen flows. Yet another improvement is the repeater functionality here. Repeater functionality is now GA. It came in the last release as a beta functionality. With the repeater functionality, I can actually allow, for example, the user to create multiple cases, right? So I can drag fields here. In these fields, and now it supports more fields. These fields can be filled in by the user, and the user can decide to add more of the same section, however many they require, or they can remove if they change their minds. And as a result, all these values can be used. You would have to loop to create these records. All these values can be used to create multiple records, which is a very useful functionality. This is the functionality that many form solutions in the App Exchange provided. Now it is out of the box in Salesforce. That's great. Another functionality now still in beta is an action button. Now you can add an action button here in beta functionality, and that action button can launch an auto launch flow. Again, if you wanted to create a case, for example, based on the values that are already on the screen, the user has submitted, or based on the values that you got from another record query, then you are going to be able to create the case by clicking on this action button. This functionality is still in beta though. Well, another welcome change here, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you by adding a decision here. We can now check in our decisions whether, let's see whether we can check one of the address fields here and city value, for example. Now, if I wanted to check whether the city value is blank, we had inconsistent behavior inside Salesforce flows, how that could be achieved. Sometimes we actually checked whether this value equaled empty over here without actually entering anything. There was a global value that was an empty string here. Yeah, blank value, empty string. Sometimes we would check against that. For some variables, is null worked. Now we actually have an is blank here, is blank true. And that should solve some of the confusion we've had before. When we want to implement custom validation and error messages or something on the back of our screens, this is going to come in quite handy. Another change here is that the transform element is now GA. Transform element helps us to transform full records or collections, and it works really well when we are doing HTTP callouts, for example. We get data from external systems. It helps us transform before we do our operations within Salesforce. One other improvement that I want to mention, I'm not really going to go into building a flow here, but when you build a schedule triggered flow now, in debug, you get the option of choosing which record schedule triggered flow should debug on, which is fantastic because previously schedule triggered flow would randomly find a record that would fit the entry criteria and would debug just on that record. And we didn't really have a good functionality to be able to test the schedule triggered flow very thoroughly. And as a side note, schedule triggered flows for some reason consumed governors limits as a synchronous transaction. Now with this release, they are going to start consuming asynchronous transaction limits, which will give us additional capacity to perform large operations in our schedule triggered flows. That's all for now, folks. Let me know which features you like best and what's your favorite. Enjoy.